ese cos, que frío, caramba. Buenos dias, good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I'm gonna compile a bunch of videos here. But first, happy Earth Day every day. Okay, let's continue permanent ceasefire in Palestine. Yes, stop the genocide and the occupation, land back. Yes, and the apartheid. Yes, yes. Stop the genocide, stop allowing corporations and making this normal, and allowing this genocidal maniacs obsessed with greed and more money, gluttony. Okay, we rebuke it in the name of Jesus. All right, yes, yeah. So hopefully this Earth Day gives you guys a lot of reflection. Plant a tree, not that that's gonna fix anything, but made a nice offering for our mother Gaia, or home. Okay, a lot of us continue boycotting, okay, protesting, continue what it needs to be done. All right, but yeah, it's every day, it's Earth Day. All right, it's not just today.
So there we are. And that's the answer to your question. They can't let journalists in because then people like you wouldn't be able to take videos filmed by the actual soldiers killing the civilians as truth, would you?
What happened at the Al-Shifa hospital is beyond description. The Israeli soldiers stormed the hospital and opened fire indiscriminately and killing patients, the wounded, and even the medical staff.
The most agonizing moment is when the Israeli soldiers shot dead civilian men before our own eyes. Some were shot dead, others were buried alive in ditches. Most of the dead bodies were bulldozed and buried by the Israelis. I saw many young men handcuffed and blindfolded, thrown in a ditch and buried with sand. We witnessed it all. It happened before our own eyes.
Let us try to understand what happened at Al-Shifa Hospital over a 2-week period, a 2-week siege that has left over 400 people executed. And I don't think we're really able to fully conceptualize what happened in Al-Shifa Hospital. And today really proves that, as there was mass graves that were found. After the occupation executed doctors, nurses, patients, civilians, they were using bulldozers to bury them. Let me try to get y'all to understand something. You don't do that to kill terrorists, right? You don't bury terrorists in mass graves. You do that to hide crimes. You do that when you execute mass amounts of people. I can't post the images and the videos because my video will get taken down, but please go look at it. And in what reality, and in what world does that, what happened at Al-Shifa, constitute self-defense? The world is literally bearing witness to a whole genocide, and the worst part about it is, they are literally getting away with it.
Hey, I want to talk about something crucial, yet overlooked. Newborns abandoned at birth. Due to the genocide and the recent war, people have been suffering financially due to the massive displacement also. It forces them to leave newborns, children of all ages behind. They cannot afford the living expenses of their own, let alone other new, needy family members. On a daily basis, I face this issue in the neonatal ICU. It's very unfortunate, heartbreaking. We try to contact the families, but sometimes they run away. They don't pick up the phone, and if they do, they come up with heartbreaking responses. My husband died, and I don't want to be reminded of him right now. My family has been displaced to a new region, and I don't know what to do. Or I cannot afford the living expenses of this child. I'm living in a tent or on the streets. There is no hygiene, there is no food, there is no milk, no clothes for the baby. They sometimes think that a doctor or a nurse's touch can replace a mother's care and love, but that's never the case. I believe that every child deserves a decent upbringing. They deserve care, love, in a very healthy, safe environment. What's the solution?
Looking at a very horrific attack that just took place at a Maghazi refugee camp within the past 45 minutes or so. A drone fired the missiles on a group of people. Later on, we learned it from eyewitness in the area that these were a group of children at a playground that was set up near a camp for displaced families. And those children are regularly visiting this playground. And just as a father of 3 children, I understand why displaced families would send their kids just for an hour or a couple hours just to keep them entertained and release all the negative energy in them. Because right now, displaced families have the hardest time inside tents or inside other people's residential homes trying to stay protected and safe. But it's as necessary as also staying safe just to give space to those children. So 11 children have been killed in this attack. And just one wonder what threat these children had posed to have the Israeli military fire a missile drone on them. 11 reported killed, with dozens of injuries in the area. Those who had the scene of the attack described horrific scenes of the children torn apart by the massive explosion caused by the missiles.
I cannot wrap my mind around how some of you mothers out there have remained dead silent 6 months into genocide. 190 days, and you've remained dead silent and ignored the thousands of cries of the children in Gaza. And you've continuously shown that you would ignore my child's cries, that you would ignore if my child died. Are you not a mother? Is a child not a child? Or are they not wide enough for you to give a flying fuck about? We've watched Western mainstream media completely lie through their teeth about Arabs, about Islam, about how Palestinians don't have a right to exist, and you remain dead silent? What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? I don't even know how to exist alongside some of you. How do I exist alongside people who are deaf, blind, with a heart of fucking stone? You should be ashamed. We are witnessing the most horrific genocide in history, live streamed through our phones 24/7, and you remain silent? Why? Why?
Engaging in conflict in a way that is generative is an anti-white supremacy practice, and I will tell you why. One of the cornerstones of white supremacy is this idea of sameness, that we have to be the same. And the problem with conflict is that it's forcing us to see, to realize that we are indeed different. Liberation for All is interested in not sameness, but instead shared humanity. And those two things are near enemies. If you know, you know. When we are convinced of our shared humanity, conflict does not become an issue. Conflict becomes a portal to get to know each other better. Conflict becomes a way for us to serve each other better. Conflict becomes a way to realize differences that we expected to be here to begin with.
What terrorists do is target the innocent deliberately. And therefore my definition of terrorism is the systematic and deliberate attack, the murder, maiming, and menacing of innocents, civilians, for political goals. You can tell a lot about terrorists, but what happens when they come to power? Those who fight for freedom and come to power do not impose terrorism. Those who do, who fight in terroristic means, end up as being masters of terrorist states.
If your version of history is true, then why do you need to make sure nobody questions it? Why do you need to spend billions of dollars to make sure that foreign governments are telling your version of history? Why do you need to set up entire institutes to make sure that your version of history is written into the curriculum of school children in foreign countries? If your version of history is true, why do you feel the need to threaten, harass, and intimidate activists, journalists, and historians who deviate from your official narrative? Why do you need to push for laws that criminalize alternative interpretations of your history? Why is it that any deviation from your official narrative has to be labeled anti-Semitic and immediately dismissed? Why do you so desperately need to enlist the help of Western media to make sure that your version of history is the only one that gets told? If your version of history is true, then why do you need to slander anyone who questions it? Why must you go to such extraordinary lengths and trouble to codify your propaganda into guidebooks, textbooks, history books, and geography books? Why do you need to manipulate public opinion, suppress scholarly inquiry, and instill the fear of social and professional disaster into the minds of anyone who deviates from your narrative? If your version of history is true, then why are you so afraid of its ability to withstand public debate and scrutiny? If your version of history is true, then why do you need to hide from it?
Excuse me? They did what again? They drugged a Palestinian child after they shot him 5 times, beat him, and interrogated him. Not one for cliche sayings, but when they say every accusation is a confession, now I'm really starting to believe that shit. What they did to this boy is not exactly the story that they said that Hamas did to their hostages. Oh, Hamas gave them tranquilizers to make them happier. This anesthesia was not meant to make this boy happy. And by the way, if you know anything about anesthesia, it makes you sleepy. I didn't see any of those hostages that were released falling out of the car, not able to open their eyes. And this was just another unproven claim because they didn't even run any blood work on any of these people who they claimed were drugged. For anybody who wants to say that this is just a bunch of Hamas propaganda, Haaretz even admitted that they sedate their prisoners, but they're doing it to force feed them so these prisoners don't starve to death during their hunger strikes. What other reason does Israel use anesthetics for on hostages that they hold in their detention centers? Haaretz also made an article that admitted March 20th of this year that there was autopsies of Palestinians who died in Israeli prisons due to medical neglect, and these people were severely beaten. Their excuse is that it's because there's severe overcrowding. Really? Overcrowding? Is that why you have to anesthetize your hostages? Israel was also allowing pharmaceutical companies to test their drugs on Palestinian prisoners as well. The Israeli Health Ministry had authorized permits to test new drugs on Palestinian inmates, and over 5,000 tests were done. This is Dr. Nadera Shalhoub. She's an Israeli professor and whistleblower who lost her job after she blew the lid off of this story. Her and other sources behind the story are regularly discredited by the Israeli media. God bless this woman. And if you're reading the claims where they said that this is completely not true, remember they also said that this never happened as well. بطلب البسطار وبراس العيون راسي بجعله بوز البسطار حديد وبطل زي هيك وانا جوي وانا واقع على الارض وقول لي قوم قلت له مش قادر وقول لي قوم خبطني زي هيك وبدون رحمة. كنا نلقط خضرة. كنت على السلك وبخوني 5 طلقات واخذوني واعتقلوني. حبيبي يا ماما كثير شكر لك حروني بتعتذرك يا ماما. نفسي اشوفك 15 يوم مش شايفك.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. You first stand up.
People who would suggest that Israel was the final nail in American imperialism's coffin for being too optimistic. But seeing Americans praise Iran, a country that has been demonized for as long as I've been alive and definitely longer, seeing Americans praise them for giving Israel a taste of their own medicine is giving me hope. This is a country that was labeled explicitly as an evil terrorist state. But similar to how some of us are no longer drinking the Kool-Aid about October 7th or Hamas, we're no longer taking the label terrorist seriously, especially given the context they so desperately try to obscure. Evil terrorist states destabilize democratically elected governments for their own gain of that state's natural resources. Like, I know the CIA is mad as hell that 70 years worth of Islamophobic propaganda went to waste in less than a year. Nature is healing. And I'm not even joking when I say this, because what we're going to have to do to free Palestine is going to change the world. It has to.
So yeah, Israel is using drones that cry like children in the middle of the night to lure people out of hiding and then shoot them with snipers or just the drones themselves. I'm seeing a good number of people talking about this because this is just bonkers. And a lot of what they're just saying is that this is incredibly evil, which is true, which is 100% true. And the thing is, though, I think it is worth talking about why this is evil, because it's intense. And no, I'm not explaining this to anyone because I think that this is a hard thing to grasp as incredibly evil. I'm explaining it because the depths of evil should be fully grasped here. Because here's the thing about this. You are playing the sounds of crying children or, women in distress being attacked or beaten. You're doing that to try and lure people out. Here's why this makes no sense as a weapon of war and is purely and specifically a weapon of genocide. Because tactics like this specifically cannot get bad people. Bad people are specifically the ones who do not care about a child in need. Bad people do not come out to get shot in this situation. Bad people stay in hiding because they don't give a shit. So by the nature of the very setup that Israel has created, they've guaranteed that not a single bad person is going to come out and get killed this way. They have guaranteed that none of the bad people are in harm's way. Not only that, good people would not even be threatened by this. Because the average good person who is otherwise a kind and caring person who wants to help the crying child would still not leave the safety of their hiding place in order to help that child because they are afraid of being killed by the ongoing genocide of which they are the target. Not going out and helping a child that you think might be in distress when you think your life is in danger does not make you a bad person. You are still a totally normal human being with totally normal survival instincts. Which means the only people that Israel is killing this way are goddamn heroes. The only people that this is threatening are the best human beings on this planet. The people who have already been killed by Israel using this strategy are specifically the most kind, caring, and brave human beings on the face of the planet, knowingly risking their lives in order to try and help a child they don't know. This is a test to find the kindest human beings that have ever existed, and then they are explicitly killing those human beings. That is super villain cartoon evil bullshit. That's something I would expect Dante to describe happening in hell. But it's not in hell. It is right here. It is being perpetrated by our allies. We are funding this. We are paying for this. If this is not already explicitly a war crime, it is just because human beings have not been consistently sadistic enough to do something like this. Ceasefire now. End the occupation. Free Palestine.
So Netanyahu just revealed a $5 billion real estate investment plan for Gaza. But it's not for Palestinians. It's for settlers. At the same time, the Biden administration has been secretly pressuring UN countries to vote against Palestinian statehood. All of this happening while our Congress, our U.S. Congress, voted to ban the phrase "from the river to the sea" because it's considered anti-Semitic and genocidal. The audacity to gaslight at this level is infuriating and maddening. We all know that this is the U.S. empire's genocide. They're not just complicit, they are co-conspirators and active participants alongside Israel.
On the day of Eid, I was invited to a dinner and I met two new Sudanese friends, and I started to talk with them about Sudan and if they are able to get in touch with their families. If you're not aware, there is a huge communication blackout in Sudan, and they told me they are able to get in touch with them momentarily for short, few minutes calls. And if you're not aware, Sudan is going through a huge war that led to 8 million people displaced, thousands of people getting killed, and many massacres. What's happening in Sudan is not less important to what's happening in Gaza or, for example, Ukraine, but it is intentionally ignored by Western media because there is no Western influence or Western interest in Sudan. And to understand what's happening in Sudan, we need to go back in time a few decades ago. In 1989, Omar al-Bashir performed a military coup to take over the government, in which he became the president for the next 30 years. And Sudan was not a poor country. Sudan was one of the richest countries in Africa. Sudan is rich in gold and minerals and have abundance of livestock. It's also one of the most fertile countries in Africa. But Omar al-Bashir was corrupt. He did not try to invest in any infrastructure. Like every other year, Sudan would flood because there are no dams to protect the country. In 2019, the people of Sudan tried to protest in order to have democratic elections, to have a democratic system in Sudan. Omar al-Bashir was toppled off by the army, in which they installed a transitional government. That transitional government lasted for only 2 years, and then the army performed a coup on the government and removed the prime minister. At that point, 2 Sudanese men took over the government. The army under Abdel Fattah Burhan and Rapid Support Forces, for short RSF, under Hamdan Dagalo Hamitti. The RSF is paramilitia group that was created by Omar al-Bashir in order to suppress any revolt by any non-Arab minority Sudanese in Sudan. In fact, Omar al-Bashir was supposed to be indicted by the International Criminal Court in the light of the massacres and the war crimes that he committed. And who was his best buddy to commit these war crimes? It was Hamitti. Hamitti was never a military man. He was like a cattle herder. He used to deal with camels. And then he was selected by Omar al-Bashir to lead the militia. Anyway, after 2021, Burhan and Hamitti became close friends. But Burhan saw in Hamitti some threat because his militia was over 100,000 men. So he wanted to include them within the army. But Hamitti didn't like that, and he wanted to have his own independence. And because of that, in April 2023, the fight between the army and the RSF started. And because the army has air force, they would strike groups of RSF that are within civilian buildings, which led to many civilian casualties, which led eventually millions of displaced Sudanese. Hamitti eventually was able to control Darfur and the west of Sudan, in which his forces committed many massacres against the minority non-Arab Sudanese. We started to hear reports of mass SA to Sudanese women. Women are getting pregnant by the RSF members. And what the RSF members would do would go to non-Arab tribes and get into houses, find single women who have no engagement rings or have no man around in the house. They would take them, and we don't know what happened to them afterwards. And when these RSF members take over houses, the army airstrike the houses, which leads to civilian casualties. But where does Hamitti and the RSF get his support? To put it in short, Emirates and Saudi. 99% of Sudan's exported gold goes to Emirates. And Hamitti controls one of the 3 biggest gold mines in Sudan. One of them is Jabal Amir Mountain. And Hamitti started a new company called Al Janid, which one of his older brothers controls it. And through that company, he can export golds to Emirates. Have you ever wondered why the gold in Emirates is so cheap? It's because majority of that gold comes from Sudan. That's why you see ATMs that gives you gold. It's called a gold to go. And Sudan exports $16 billion of gold every year to Emirates. And of course, that money does not go to the people or the country, it goes to the RSF. Unfortunately, Sudan is not getting the same attention as Gaza, for example, because there are no journalists who can dare to publish anything. And because we're not getting live footage and updated information from on the ground in Sudan, the attention Sudan is getting is very limited. That doesn't mean that Sudan should be ignored. The people of Sudan are the most kindest people I've ever met. Growing up with Sudanese almost all my life, the Sudanese friends are so calm, so generous, so sweet. They are the kindest Arab I've ever met. You go and ask any Arab, who is the kindest Arab you'll ever meet? They will definitely say the Sudanese. Sudan needs from us a lot of attention. Sudan needs a lot of aid to support the people who got displaced to Chad, Niger, Egypt, and many other countries. And unfortunately, they're not getting the fraction of the aid that's supposed to cover their needs. If you see any information coming from Sudan, make sure to engage with it and share it. That's the least that we can do at the moment. Allah yahmi Sudan wa ahlaha ya Rabb. Ameen, ameen ya Rabb.
Okay, so there are many things that need to be addressed from the Chelsea Handler comedy takedown last night. Please go watch it if you didn't yet, so you have context. But in this video, I'm going to focus on how disgusting that white mob of a crowd was. Keep in mind, her prime audience, the entire audience, the majority of them were white, liberal feminists. The same motherfuckers who claim to stand for peace, equality, justice, claim being the operative word, because what we saw from them in just a few short video clips was some of the most disgusting, dehumanizing, and racist behavior that I've seen in a while. And it's not surprising, just American shit. If you are more bothered by people disrupting your precious little comedy outing evening, if you're more bothered by them yelling and disrupting your show than you are about what they're protesting, the mass murder of innocent families, that is the embodiment of privilege. The embodiment of privilege is what allows white supremacy to thrive. In other words, that's the status quo in this country. White supremacy thriving. And it is so common that when we protest it, people think you're protesting America. Ding, ding, ding. Glad you finally connected those dots. Newsflash. You're not one of the good guys if you're not protesting a country that's actively funding and supporting a genocide, even if it's your own country. The most patriotic thing we can do in this country is hold it accountable for its violence. Last night, we saw a lot of fucking violence. Half of it was in the form of silence. Silence is what allows white supremacy to thrive. We know that. Silence is violence. And there were people standing up, pointing to the protesters so that they could be taken out, just like a good little Nazi. This is what Palestine is exposing. People who are more addicted to their comfort and their privilege than they are about caring about human life. For those in the back, let me break it down for you, because this is how this plays out. A lot of you will say, well, why are you focusing on the crowd in front of Chelsea Handler? This is not where you should be. This is splitting the left. It's hurting your cause. Focus on politicians. No, bitch. This is the exact demographic that needs to be spoke to. You understand that this genocide would not be possible, and this is a matter of public record that Netanyahu and the IOF have publicly stated that they are thanking us, that it wouldn't be possible without our support, without the weapons that Biden keeps bypassing Congress to send. So whether you claim to support it or not, by virtue of the fact that you live in this country and you voted in this government and you pay taxes, you support it by default. So if you were not disrupting the peace, protesting it, and speaking out against it on a daily basis, not just silently in your DMs and in text, but openly in public, at work, with your friends, at church, at school, then you are complicit. It is exposing the hypocrisy of all white feminism, of all white liberals, and not just white. You don't have to be white to uphold whiteness, but the people who claim to be the lesser of two evils, or recently named Blue MAGA. And that was the main audience last night, which is why we wanted to make them uncomfortable, because you don't dismantle these systems that are harming us all and contributing to the status quo, which is contributing to this genocide, without disrupting the peace. It's not going to be disrupted by the powers that be aren't just going to decide, well, you know, that's enough of this genocide. I guess we're done with that. Fuck no. Reminder, if you align with Zionism, you are a sociopath. And you definitely don't give a fuck about children or any human life. Chelsea Handler is a Zionist. The majority of that crowd last night were white feminists who aligned themselves, at least aligned themselves enough to be silent in the face of sociopathic Zionism. I mean, there were people there throwing fucking glasses of red wine on some of the protesters. There was another white woman there who wanted one of the Muslim women to take her hijab off because she said it made her nervous. And P.S., your comment last night about, well, they're yelling at me because I'm Jewish, not going to work this time. We know that you're going to play the victim, as Zionists always do, and hide behind anti-Semitism, but the whole world sees right past that steaming pile of horseshit now. We know that Israel equals Zionism. It has never and will never equal Judaism. If you are still conflating Israel with Jewish, you are causing anti-Semitism. So no, we are calling you out. We are protesting because you support Israel, and Israel is the one who has murdered over 40,000 innocent people, half of them babies. That's what we're protesting. And something tells me that you already know that, but you just don't give a fuck. Because money, right? So Chelsea, honey, no business as usual, babe. Not while you're going on tour while you're supporting a genocide. Speaking of that, aren't you going to Australia soon? You might want to start reading some of your new messages.
The fact that the TikTok ban was lumped in with the military aid being sent to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan shows that the government is declaring war on their own people. The US empire is not only funding wars overseas, but they're also funding wars domestically against us. They're declaring war against our freedom of speech, our freedom of learning, our freedom of organizing, and our freedom of making connections with each other. They don't care about us. They have never cared about us. They have only cared about our votes to help keep them in power so that they could continue to pass policies that keep the rich and wealthy in power.
Shocked doesn't even begin to describe how I feel about the violence with which Columbia University treated students who were engaging in peaceful protest today on their campus. You might have seen this in the news today or on Twitter or whatever, but the details are actually way worse than I thought. Today is Thursday, April 18th, and just since yesterday, Wednesday, Columbia University students have been peacefully protesting on campus. They've been opposing Israeli military action in Gaza and demanding that their university divests from companies that profit from Israeli apartheid. Okay, not only was the protest peaceful, but one really crucial piece of information that a lot of the coverage leaves out is the fact that the students were on a designated part of the campus that is for student protest. It's not like they were just in some random place or, obstructing students from being able to attend their classes or obstructing any kind of university activity. They were in spaces that are designated for student protest. Despite this, the president of Columbia University requested in writing that the city of New York remove these protesters from campus. This is honestly atrocious enough on its own, but listen to this. Another crucial piece of information that a lot of the coverage misses is how they managed to do this. The students, in the end, 108 students were arrested for trespassing, but you can't trespass on your own university, right? You're allowed to be there. The students were first suspended so that they would be able to be charged with trespassing. Let's just make sure we understand this. The university suspended these students who were engaging in peaceful protest within their own campus, not obstructing anyone, not hurting anybody, suspended these students so that the massive numbers of NYPD that the university requested could arrest these students. Let's think for a moment about the level of harm that this university is inflicting upon the students that it is entrusted to take care of. Not only is suspending students so that they can be arrested for trespassing so violent on its own, suspension also has so many ramifications. I mean, students were denied access to their dorm rooms, locked out from their belongings, told that they couldn't attend their classes, of course, no longer able to access campus. That also means that these students are not able to access their healthcare, which almost all, if not all, students receive through the university. And here's the photo that sent me over the edge. Honestly, today's been a pretty tough day watching my own alma mater that I have long been very proud to be associated with inflicting this level of violence on its students. This is what Columbia University did to the belongings of the students who they suspended so that they could then arrest them. They took these students' belongings after making them homeless, after revoking their access to their education, revoking their access to healthcare. They took these students' belongings and chucked them into an alleyway. And this is not just like leftover trash. There are full backpacks all down here, all these tents, all this camping equipment, jackets. Again, this is the institution that has been entrusted with the safety of these students. I mean, what do you even say? For the president of a university to bring this upon her students who are simply engaging in peaceful protest on their principles, on their beliefs, betraying her foremost obligation as a university president to her students, which is simply to protect them. Here's a little clip of when the arrests started. Just think for a moment how dystopian this is. Like, this does not feel real to be witnessing. But do you want to see what the students did in response? This makes me so proud. I actually think I might cry.
This is actually a legitimate question. I'll give you my understanding based on what I've heard and what I've read, and then people can add stuff in the comments if I say anything incorrect. But cross-border travel is closed, except for medical evacuees in some cases and foreign nationals. And even medical evacuees are severely restricted based on what I've heard from the ground. But cross-border travel is closed. Before the genocide, Palestinians could apply to travel to Egypt, and there was a waiting time of weeks or months, or they could pay a fee to an agency for what's called coordination, where they would pay a fee to an agency, and this would basically expedite the process and enable them to travel quicker. Currently, there's only one agency that's operating, so cross-border travel as regular is no longer an option. So people are paying a fee to this agency for coordination to be able to be approved to travel through the border. Before the genocide, this agency was charging $350 USD per person. They are currently charging $5,000 per head to get through Rafah to Egypt. So this has become a multi-million-dollar industry that people are trying to raise funds for to flee for their lives.
This is your reminder that the point of colonialism is for you to self-destruct, for our communities to self-destruct, for us to stay in a state of despair and hopelessness and despondency, for us to feel tired and exhausted, mentally unwell, physically unable to just thrive and live. The cruelty is the point. The cruelty is always the point. Never forget that. Never forget that what you're fighting for is for us to be seen as humans. That's all. That's literally the basis for liberation. Because colonialism is psychological warfare. The whole point of it is to dehumanize. We have to humanize ourselves, our children, the people in our communities. It starts with us, starts with our families, and then we work our way out from our inner circles to the community at large, to greater society, to the country, so on and so forth. But it does start within. So if you are dehumanizing yourself, you are doing the work of the oppressor, of the colonizer. If you're telling yourself that you are not worthy of rest and are not worthy of to be able to thrive in your life without having to work very hard for it, you're doing the work of the colonizer.
All right. Hopefully that's enlightening for you. Don't do their work. Do the opposite. Free Palestine. From the river to the sea.